For me, to be an animal advocate is to give, whether it's a particular animal or animals in general, a voice.
Some animal shelters, particularly in metropolitan communities, are in need of reform because they have just experienced so many animals coming into the shelter.
Single individuals or small groups of people can engage in efforts that result in changes for people and animals in their communities.
My name is Sonali Sandane. I chair the DeKalb Animal Services Advisory Board. I am also a member of Advocates for DeKalb Animals. Our municipal shelters are in need of reform because they are always an afterthought when it comes to funding, when it comes to policy making, when it comes to legislative work. It is never a priority for anyone. And it goes back to, again, the way we look at animals.
My name is Katya M. Gunther. I'm professor of gender and sexuality studies at the University of California, Riverside. When municipalities are faced with questions like funding public schools or funding animal shelters, the funding is always going to head towards the areas that are viewed as higher priority.
My name's Lisa Milot, and I'm the Annie and Zach Stanton Distinguished Professor of Canine Welfare Law at the University of Georgia. So when I first got involved with trying to pass an ordinance for animal control, which would play into some improvements in programs here in Athens, Clarke County, the then shelter superintendent told me that animal issues were really the third rail of local politics, meaning nobody wanted to touch them. There are so many people who feel so strongly about animals, either animals in their position as property or animals in their position as members of the family.
People who get involved, who get interested in what's going on in their local animal shelters, have very strong emotional connections to the work that is being done in efforts at reform. Political leaders are afraid of the kind of wrath they know they can easily incur from animal shelter advocates. They're very quick to utilize social media as a way to troll or attack. And it's a difficult arena because there's also so many opinions, often which are not empirically based.
Dr. Gunther has studied how the framework of animal welfare, in which volunteers provide much of the work, inhibits reforms even though the conditions otherwise seem ripe for collective mobilization. She identifies 5 features of efforts to drive change in municipal animal shelters that reduce the likelihood that volunteers will successfully bring about reform, even though reform is explicitly a goal of many of the volunteers. Pressure for change builds in a municipal shelter environment as animals are impounded and shelter capacity fills. Volunteers worry about the possible outcomes for the animals they've grown close to, but the pressure is relieved, incompletely and only temporarily, when there is a feel-good moment, like the adoption or rescue of a favorite animal. This event reduces the stress felt by volunteers, and thus the pressure for action. In shelters with thousands of animals impounded annually, this sort of disruption happens on a daily basis. When faced with constant criticism and the realities of an overcrowded shelter management often focuses on emphasizing small changes or the hope of progress to promise that change is underway, with the next hire or the next funding cycle, with assurances that shelter staff shares the goals of volunteers and is working on positive change. This narrative is difficult to challenge since it isn't concrete. It's about hope for the future, not elements disprovable in the moment. Friendships, or at least a sense of everyone being in it together, often develop between shelter staff and volunteers, which reduces the impetus to drive change and strengthens the narrative of positive change. Volunteers want to believe things can and will change, and feel like partners with staff, even when they are at odds over specific actions. Mobilization puts alliances with shelter staff and other advocates at risk, as there are inevitably disagreements concerning how to proceed. A focus on cat issues doesn't draw support from the dog people. The volunteers interested in changing the shelter conflict with those focused on the community conditions that lead to an overcrowded shelter. In many cases, the effort to take collective action ends up fizzling out. Volunteers are embraced in the shelter environment, while activists are rejected, banned from entering shelters, or blocked from shelter social media. Many volunteers rightly worry that their ability to help individual animals will be compromised if they speak up and become activists. A result of these factors is that while volunteers often desperately want reforms and seem well positioned to achieve them, activism in this area is rarely successful.
My name is Michelle Long Spears. I serve as the District 2 Commissioner in DeKalb County, Georgia. Right now, animal shelters, including our own, which is run by Lifeline, are grappling with rising cost, with volunteer burnout, struggling to attract staff. It's a hard job working in an animal shelter.
I think that shelter reform is really challenging because what you're doing is trying to fix a broken institution. And it's not about individuals within those shelters. That is to say, it's not about individual staff members or volunteers. It's really about the institutional culture within those organizations. And that is something that is tremendously difficult to challenge.
Municipal animal shelters are very frequently in need of reform. The lack of funding means that there's a lot of times animal control staff that does not have specific training. And you also have volunteers a lot of times that are jumping in and doing a lot of the shelter tasks, which is great, but it can lead to enabling a community not to properly fund the animal shelter so that the improvements aren't made as quickly and perhaps professionally as they should be.
Volunteers are everything. These are the people that are often working full-time, have families, and then on top of that are coming to the shelter and walking the dogs, cleaning the kennels, or fostering, attending county meetings to advocate for reforms. These are the people that know the animals intimately and are able to tell their story and to give them a voice. Advocacy would be nothing without the volunteers in the shelter.
I think volunteers are often the unsung heroes of animal welfare reform. They're actually working inside of shelter environments. They're seeing how animals are being processed at intake, what their lives are like during their period of time at the shelter, and then what adoption practices and procedures are like when animals exit. So they can make suggestions to management and routinely do, as a group, advocate to managers that they make specific changes that they hope will increase the live release rate, and or that will improve the quality of life for animals during the period that they are in the shelter.
It's a broken system. Animal services has been difficult to deal with all over the country, not just in DeKalb County. There are funding challenges. There are issues associated with attracting the talent, the folks to work at the animal shelter. It's a hard job. We are blessed with the DeKalb County animal advocates, and they show up to our shelter every day. But there's also an issue with volunteer burnout, to go and clean the kennels out, to go and hold an animal's paw as it's being euthanized, to walk into the shelter every day, day after day after day, and see the same animals in their crates. That's not okay. Our animals deserve a better quality of life than what they currently have. And we are working day after day trying to tackle the issues and ensure a better quality of life for our furry friends here in DeKalb County.
The legal status of animals as property can really complicate reform efforts because people have constitutional rights with respect to their property. So there are due process rights that protect people with respect to their property. They don't protect the property itself.
Unfortunately and sadly, the way these animals are perceived are as property. But again, we know through our experiences that they are not property. They are not objects. They have the ability to feel things. That's where reform needs to happen. We need to have a shift in the mindset of how we are looking at these animals.
That duality of their legal existence just means that there are people who are going to push back based on the fact that they do have property rights to these animals. You end up with some segment of the population who feels really strongly that you can just discard the animals that are unwanted without any problem because they are things that are owned by people, and when they stop being useful, they can be disposed of.
Data is powerful. Do your own research. Look at those records, field records. Look at those shelter records. Come to your own conclusions and opinions based on the data that you are seeing through the direct observations that you are experiencing. And don't be afraid to share them.
When we talk about reforming animal welfare, and particularly reforming shelters, a lot of the time the impetus for that comes from the volunteers at the shelter. And the volunteers at the shelter have one view of what goes on there. They might not understand all of the policies and all of the practices, and they frequently don't understand the reasons for those policies and practices. It can create a lot of tension with staff. I think it would be really hard at my job if I had a group of volunteers that generally I worked really well with, but then at times they were coming to me and just telling me I was doing it all wrong, and they were telling me that particularly in a public forum without necessarily understanding why we were doing what we were doing. And I think it's really important, to the extent that volunteers are trying to drive change, to first of all find out why what is happening. So why are these particular practices in place? And maybe they can be improved, but why did they get here? It's not because the staff is in any way ill-willed towards the animals or is not aware of modern sheltering trends a lot of the time. It's for very practical reasons. It might be budget constraints, it might be manpower constraints, it might be that certain things that have worked in other communities were tried here and they don't work well in the particular community. It can be hard to keep in mind that everybody's on the same team and that we're all trying to reach the same end.
Be persistent. If you don't know how something works structurally, like how your government works, or why are your court-held animals remaining in your shelter that long? Why are you seeing poor outcomes for these dogs? Start looking at those questions and try to answer them. You're not going to answer them overnight. It's going to take time and it's going to take learning, but you'll get there. People may not take you seriously. That's okay. As long as you believe in what you're saying and what you think needs to happen, keep going.
The other point I would want to mention is to not underestimate what one or even a small group of people can potentially do. Here in the Los Angeles area, for example, Lori Wise founded an organization called Downtown Dog Rescue and began a shelter intervention program. And that one program has been so transformational for thousands of people and thousands of companion animals, cats and dogs, and I'm guessing other animals as well. And I would just note that it really is the effort of one person.
Providing solutions, including explaining how a change worked in another peer jurisdiction, is critical to making change. Many times, local legislators don't know what the options are, or what neighboring counties are doing, or the implications of adopting one ordinance over another. Being able to point specifically to a solution can provide clarity to legislators by giving them examples of success. Statements such as mandating the spaying and neutering of animals that frequently wander on their second impound and offering it for free on the first reduced frequent flyers and unintended litters, as well as made some residents happy and did not lead to more abandonment or conflict in Athens-Clarke County.
There are a lot of ways in which the public can communicate with policyholders. I think it's more important to communicate with policymakers than it is to communicate with shelter staff directly, to encourage greater oversight of shelter systems and individual shelters, and to promote the idea that people in the community care about the animal shelter just as much as they care about the fire department and the public school system.
Understanding governmental apparatus and trying to push reform is important. And I feel that this is the one area that the layperson, the average person may miss. The commissioners are responsible or accountable for certain things, and the county CEO is responsible and accountable for certain things. And it's really important to understand the roles and structures so that you're able to, when you make that ask, you're asking the right person. If you're not going to the right person, it's easy to get a response like, well, that's not my jurisdiction or that's not my lane. So it is important to do the homework.
DeKalb County is blessed to have a robust group of advocates, of volunteers, the DeKalb County Animal Advocates. The advocates, they show up to our public meetings, they go to the podium and express their concerns and their opinions and their sorrow. And when they show up and you look out from the dais and you see a sea of red shirts out there, that in itself makes a statement.
In 2019, a handful of us worked to bring reform to Athens-Clarke County Animal Services, an open admission municipal shelter in a county with a poverty rate above 20%. We spent 2 years working quietly within the county structure, meeting with shelter management, their bosses, and their bosses' bosses. Each time we were told changes would be made, and some were. The shelter supervisor was transferred to a different department, and a part-time volunteer coordinator position was added. And the natural cycles at the shelter meant we pulled back to wait and see how things played out. But after 2 years, it was clear no real changes were coming. The shelter was still badly underfunded. Shelter management still made reckless decisions that cost dozens of animals their lives, and care standards at the shelter were inhumane. We went public with our concerns after 32 cats and kittens, healthy and many fully vaccinated, were euthanized for a supposed panleukopenia outbreak, even though a necropsy on the supposedly infected kitten showed no signs of the virus. We didn't know how it would turn out, but nearly all of the primary shelter volunteers and rescues signed an open letter to the commissioners detailing the facts and misinformation that had been put out.
This is the second year we're dealing with absolutely stunning mismanagement at the shelter. Though I have no doubt the issues have been going on for far longer. But in the past, staff quit, volunteers walked away, and rescue groups moved on to more appreciative counties. Tonight we're trying something different. Don't get me wrong, many of us are on the verge of walking away. We're not masochists, we're lawyers, we're veterinarians, we're behaviorists, we're volunteers, we're fosters, and we're donors. And we have better things to do with our time, expertise, money, and passion if we're not wanted in Athens. The boards of the shelter's major partners, Athens Pets, Three Paws Animal Rescue, and Athens Canine Rescue, and the people who make the decisions about which shelters they help from the Athens Area Humane Society and from Circle of Friends Animal Society are united in saying things need to change now. We need your help for that change. We're done working with the county's chain of command where we are ignored or strung along and stonewalled. I would like to ask the folks here tonight who recognize that animal control is broken and demand it be fixed to stand up and be recognized. We are here to say that things must change. This morning you received an email from me asking for specific commitments to help us, help the neediest animals in our community, help the people who care for them. We know some of the asked for items are beyond your power as commissioners, but none of them are beyond our power, yours, mine, ours. As residents of Athens Clarke County, we're asking you to take the lead in fixing this problem that has gone on for far too long.
So many times, community residents come before this commission with ideas and suggestions that take long-term solution. We want to change things, but we got the bureaucracy and the money issue, so it takes longer to get things done. Some things that people come to us about, they're so good and so important, but they're out of our lane. We have no power, so a lot of times people come to us and they vent, and I hurt because I know that is nothing in our power to fix or address. But the animal shelter is local government. We should be able to fix that yesterday. This is our responsibility that we can directly impact. I'm sorry that it took all of you to come down here to get it, to let us know and educate us.
We were successful in our effort. One person was asked to resign after the meeting. New, really good outside management was brought in, and the shelter budget was immediately doubled. And then we began the hard work of building trust and developing the shelter's first 5-year strategic plan.
Traps that sometimes volunteers fall into, or other people trying to affect reforms, is to have it all play out on social media. Social media, I think, can be a great way to bring attention to something, but to the extent you're revealing anything sensitive or inflammatory, it's really a bridge burning stage of the negotiation. It's not something to start with, it's something to do when all other efforts have been exhausted.
You have to be careful what you put out there. It cannot be erased. When you put something on social media, make sure that it is accurate. Make sure that you have examples or data or experiences to back it up, and then own it, whichever way it goes. I believe that every communication needs to happen respectfully, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be sharing, what you have uncovered and, what your opinions are based on the data that you have uncovered. Never be afraid to say something if you're seeing something. It is unrealistic to expect change overnight. So if you don't have those expectations and if you just keep persisting, change will happen.
Our DeKalb County advocates have brought to my attention several of the issues that they have been grappling with for decades here in DeKalb County. The Animal Services Advisory Board, they have mapped out a 5-point plan which addresses solutions to our animal services challenges here in DeKalb County.
I think community involvement is central for animal welfare reform to take place and to take place in a way that reflects the actual needs of communities. It's one of the major shortcomings of so many animal shelters and animal shelter systems that they do not have in place some kind of meaningful and functional community advisory board that helps oversee and offer insight into what the shelter is doing well for the community and what the shelter could improve upon. I really think that pushing for and promoting community advisory boards in a local shelter system to implement that and have it be part of local law, local code would be one important step towards meaningful animal shelter reform.
Here was the county management structure, some of the staff members at the shelter, a couple of the more involved volunteers, sitting down and saying, how are we going to move ahead? How do we build up something much better? We decided against bringing in an outside consultant and instead said, no, we have enough expertise and we do have enough trust and background here. They did a really good job of having us all be in a room once a week, every week for about 2 months, talking through what would make this all better and how we could practically do it. I think that when there are successful efforts to bring recognition to the fact that there needs to be change, a lot of times it's like a movie where you have this big moment, you come together, you establish that yes, we need change, and everybody is at the meeting and on the same side, and the commissioners are saying wonderful things, and you walk out of the meeting with a huge sense of relief. And I think so many times that's kind of it. It's like you don't see what happens next. There's not necessarily that then collaborative building of the next stage. And to me, that's what's made all of this successful. There was something about being in the room together once a week, every week, and discussing and compromising and building on each other's ideas and being able to then say, yes, this is ours. This is what we're doing.
We just had a busy election season in DeKalb. Advocates for DeKalb animals actually took that opportunity and drafted report cards for each candidate for every position. And that really got the attention of the larger community, as well as these, future candidates that were going to take these positions. And they started taking advocates for DeKalb animals seriously.
I think that some of the key findings that I would want to emphasize regarding animal welfare reform is the unevenness in which animal shelter reforms are rolled out, typically in ways that harm the animals and the people who live in the lowest income communities in the United States. If we look at where so-called progressive animal shelters are located and where shelters have very high live release rates, those shelters are disproportionately located in communities that are predominantly middle and upper income and often disproportionately serving predominantly white human populations. Of course, that also has to do with resource allocation, right? Those communities have higher property tax bases, so there's more money being funneled into their local shelters. When we look at shelters that are serving predominantly lower income communities, reform has been much slower. Those are still shelters where animals have higher likelihood of a negative outcome. that is not leaving a shelter alive, and where people also self-report much more negative experiences with animal welfare and animal control staff members. So I think that one key issue that future animal welfare reform efforts in shelters especially need to pay attention to is how to address this unevenness, how to reallocate resources so that animals and people everywhere have comparable chances within shelter systems, that we don't have some communities being over-policed, some communities where people don't have the resources to reclaim beloved animals and lose them for no other reason than that they can't pay a $400 penalty.
Animal welfare reform is really important to the well-being of a community, both for the people and for the animals, I think, because they are so much a part of our lives. It is painful to have an animal come into animal services and be euthanized, let's say, because there's some condition that can't be treated or simply for space. So many times the people who are bringing the animals in are having one of the worst periods of their lives. They might have lost their housing. They might be on the verge of losing their housing if they keep their animal. I think that that is crippling some of the most vulnerable people in our society, as well as not being fair to the animals themselves.
I don't think you can separate animals from the community. They are part of the community. In my mind, I don't think the two have ever been inseparable. When we don't enforce ordinances, how does that impact our community? When we have community members that are struggling to feed their pets despite loving them, how does that impact then the larger community? It goes both ways, and we need to look at it in a very holistic way.
Animal well-being reform is critical to a community, particularly larger metropolitan communities like DeKalb County. When you're addressing animal services, you're truly looking to reform. You're not just looking at the animal itself. You're looking at the impact of having these homeless animals roaming the street. They present public health problems. It presents public safety problems. Certainly, we don't want animals out there biting other folks. We don't want animals scaring children as they're out playing in the cul-de-sac. And so we try to look at the intersection of animals and people. And I truly believe that we exist together. This is an ecosystem that we all live in.
Again, it goes back to how we view animals, looking at them as creatures that are able to feel things rather than objects. If we can come to that and really embrace it, I think that we will make different decisions for them. That is my hope. I really hope that the future generation looks at animals differently from the way we have looked at animals.
I would encourage all local officials around the country to go and really study, research, take a deep dive, evaluate the animal services in your community. If you discover challenges, one of the ways that you can start addressing those challenges is providing the funding necessary to help solve the problem. Be a solutions-focused, forward-thinking elected official to address the problems that you currently have in your jurisdiction. But also, as local elected officials, our job is not just to think about the now, to be reactive. A job of a county commissioner, of a local elected official, is to think about your community in 20 years. How do you envision your community? I envision my community with animals in it. And I envision my community with people leading my community that care about the well-being of animals. And in doing so, you have to really evaluate what are the needs.